As the clock strikes midnight, I want to express my heartfelt wishes for a new year filled with warmth, closeness, and shared moments. Here's to another year of growing together. I miss you all so much. My health is also not good, and I have been very busy lately. The whole time I was thinking about no new up, so I really want to make this one a little gift for you all. Happy New Year. The Empress spoke. So, these indicate the highest points. Duke replied, indeed. These are the towers currently under management in Emont. Hearing his words, the Empress was puzzled. She asked, what do you mean by management? The Empress surveyed the locations where the red stones had been placed. She didn't need to investigate further. It was evident that everything in their vicinity had been decimated. Those who had barely survived would be too terrified to even raise their eyes to the sky, fearing their imminent demise. Orphaned children would wander the streets, vulnerable to trampling, while grieving parents would be left in a state of shock. She spoke, if all these red stones represent towers. They say the vast plains are a sight to behold, a fertile land that yields abundance year-round, some regions even supporting 3 harvests. Adele had a faint inkling that her mother's words had been a fabrication, but she never anticipated the truth to be so devastating. Quote, Adele lifted her gaze, her eyes alternating between Theseus and Lionel, spoke, if all these red stones were towers, then Emont has become a living hell. Duke replied, you were right. The Empire is currently nothing short of a living hell. We implore your assistance. We are in desperate need of help. Meanwhile in Ivory Palace, it was at that moment when Diane was intensely examining her own face, with a skincare specialist called in. Her maid came and told her, Your Highness, His Majesty has arrived. Startled by her maid's urgent words, Diane quickly stood up from her seat and hurriedly wiped off her makeup with her fingertips. She opened the door with a feeble appearance and saw the Emperor approaching her from the end of the corridor. Your Majesty, Diane called out to him in a fragile voice, lowering her head. She appeared delicate, as if she would break at any moment. Karl's brisk steps slowed down. A bit more strength entered the Emperor's rigid forehead. Your Majesty. Her face looked even more gaunt. She was becoming thinner. Her frail waist seemed like it could be wrapped with just one hand, and her lips were pale, devoid of any color. She even wondered if her slender neck could support the weight of her hair. She looked as if she were dying. The black sea within her chest surged once again. Afraid that she would drown in that turmoil, Karl pressed his eyes shut tightly and held his breath. He could no longer approach Diane and came to a stop. As he stood still, Diane approached him directly. Confirming the Emperor's face, which was contorted in pain with closed eyes, it seemed as if her feet, which had become wounded from walking through a new hell, were healing. A certain sense of exhilaration washed over her. Yes, he was angry. He felt sympathy for her treatment. How pitiful he must be. The Empress must be dissatisfied. Yes, he loves me. Diane cautiously nestled into Karl's embrace, resting her face against his chest and placing her hand on top. Your Majesty. Karl, who had been struggling in the Black Sea, slowly opened his eyes. As his gaze descended like a creaking sound, he saw Diane's soft blonde hair, which had buried itself in his embrace. She said, I'm fine, Your Majesty. He remained silent for a moment and slowly pushed Diane's shoulders back. She was pushed away, her soul seemingly absent, with wide-eyed astonishment. The Emperor then asked her, Did you send a merchant to the Empress's palace today? She startled, and said, Pardon me. He continued, I asked if you sent a merchant to the Empress's palace today. They were supposed to negotiate the price of a thoroughbred horse, right? Your Majesty, she took his name in a trembling voice. A chilling coldness ran down her spine, sending shivers through her entire body. Her hair stood on end, and her skin prickled with goosebumps. The emperor's expression was nothing short of icy. He wasn't concerned about Diane. He was interrogating her now. Why did she send a merchant to the empress's palace? Diane desperately grabbed the emperor's hand and pleaded earnestly. She spoke, "Your Majesty, the empress was not well. It's border dispute day, Your Majesty. Do you remember the dress the empress wore at the wedding reception? It was a wedding dress. You ruined a budget that wasn't even significant. Then how exactly does the empress buy jewelry and dresses? I was foolish, but there was no other choice. If I had given her money, she would have been even more upset. Negotiating the price of a thoroughbred horse, you say? How dare I? I only informed the merchants of the amount you had instructed me to. It was the money you gave me. I'm sorry." Diane spoke tearfully and endlessly. She wasn't telling lies. Then the emperor spoke in a cold tone, "Provoking the empress will bring you no benefit. You said all you need is my love." Diane, a moment too late, barely managed to respond. "Yes, Your Majesty," he continued, "remember those words. As long as you remember those words, I will protect you." The emperor took a step back, distancing himself from Diane. And then he gave the order to push her into the abyss. "Empty ivory palace," he gave her command. She replied, "Yes." Emperor continued, "I will arrange a residence in my palace for you. The imperial palace is a place where the empress's hands cannot reach. If you're not inclined to do so, you can return to Countess Poiter." Hearing this, she was shocked. He spoke, "No, Your Majesty, please. Please don't abandon me." Diane desperately grasped Karl's arm and lowered her head. "Don't cast me aside. Please, don't abandon me, Your Majesty." Karl, barely containing his urge to swallow a lump in his throat, shook off Diane's arm. In an annoyed tone he said, "I told you not to say that." A face in shock, a face that seemed as if it were about to die. "You're becoming more and more like my birth mother." Karl turned his body and quickly started walking away. His steps were so fast, it seemed as if he were running. Then the emperor swiftly left the ivory palace, and Diane was disheartened and kept crying. Scene again shifts to the Duke residence. The moon waned as they posed inquiries and exchanged answers, indicating the late hour. Eventually, when they rose from their seats, the butler discreetly entered and greeted Adele. Theseus proceeded to introduce the butler to her. Butler introduced himself. "I am the butler. He will escort you to your room for some rest. Please do not hesitate to inform us of any inconveniences." With a respectful gesture, the butler extended his right hand and guided Adele, who offered a light farewell to Brother Balder, proceeding alongside the butler. "We have made all the necessary arrangements for your accommodation. However, are you truly comfortable without any attendants?" Empress replied, "I appreciate your concern, but it is unnecessary. You have already done so much in such a short time. Thank you. The honor is ours." Adele followed the butler. While she was lying, she muttered, "When will this place ever feel like home? Will that day ever come?" Since departing from Gotrov, Adele felt as though she had embarked on an arduous and protracted journey. The strange unease and fatigue remained steadfast, refusing to dissipate. But even in Gotrov, I moved constantly, sleeping in different places. What sort of home was that? Adele shook her head and rubbed her eyes with her hands. Nonetheless, this was the first day she had experienced a sense of comfort since arriving here. Adele stared up at the ceiling, her eyes gleaming with frustration. She again muttered, I don't think I'll be able to fall asleep." After tossing and turning for a while, Adele finally surrendered to her restlessness and rose from her bed, grumbling after an hour of fruitless attempts at slumber. Lionel took a deep breath, massaging his forehead with exhaustion evident on his face. Despite his weariness, sleep eluded him. After tossing and turning for several hours, he conceded defeat and rose from his bed. Deciding to occupy his restless mind with a book, he ambled toward the bookshelf, selecting a thick tome. However, his gaze was drawn to the terrace window as a soft glow permeated through the translucent curtains. Parting the curtains and peering outside, he confirmed the presence of a gentle light emanating from a particular room. It was the VIP room, currently occupied by the Empress. He muttered, "Why are you still awake at this hour?" Muttering under his breath, Lionel discreetly observed the guest room where the Empress resided. Then someone throws the small stone, which catches Lionel's attention. He opens the door. However, before he could shut it completely, a faint voice reached Lionel's ears from behind. "Lionel." Lionel sighed softly, biting his lip. As he glanced down at his attire, he stepped out onto the terrace, where the Empress awaited him, her gaze fixed upon him as if she had been waiting. Lionel performed a respectful bow as a gesture of greeting. Finally, he raised his head, awaiting the Empress's next words. Surely she had summoned him with something to say. And as expected, after taking a deep breath, the Empress leaned closer, her lips forming a whisper. "Alcohol. Where is it? Do you know?" Missing the timing to respond, Lionel saw the Empress lean against the railing, her upper body leaning toward him, her voice growing louder. "Alcohol, where is it? Tell me." He asked, "Why weren't you asleep at this hour?" One would think it was a question for someone who hadn't been sleeping either. Walking side by side in the dim corridor, Adele and Lionel exchanged words. He continued, "But why suddenly ask about alcohol?" "I couldn't sleep," she replied. He continued, "Dependence on alcohol is not good." "It's not always like that. Only on nights when I can't sleep," she replied. Upon Adele's request to be informed about the whereabouts of alcohol, Lionel replied, "Please wait a moment," before he went to find the room where she was staying. Lionel guided her to the family room on the 5th floor of the main residence. Lionel asked for her understanding for a moment and began to light the lamps scattered throughout the family room. She said, "Oh, just enough light will do. Just bring out the alcohol. I'll handle it and tidy up before returning to my room." He asked, "What kind of alcohol would you like?" She replied, "Moonshine, no need for diluted ice or water. Just give it to me. No need for snacks either." As Lionel took out the bottle of moonshine, he frowned and turned to look at the Empress. He continued, "Your Majesty, this is quite potent." "It's fine," she replied. He continued, "You might get sick." In a heavy tone she said, "I said it's fine, Lionel. I've had it before." He continued, "You usually dilute this alcohol before consuming it." She then spoke playfully, "Oh, that's right. You're not one to mince words, my advisor. Just bring it." She asks, "Do you want to sit next to me?" "That's fine too. Shall we have a drink together?" "No, thank you. I'm fine," he replied. She said, "Is that so? Then drink alone, I suppose." "Well, here's to our successful collaboration." The Empress lifted her glass, gesturing slightly as if toasting. Without hesitation, she downed the contents in one gulp. Unbeknownst to himself, Lionel furrowed his brow. It must be incredibly strong and bitter. Adele, after savoring the burning sensation in her throat, exhaled a short breath. "Ah, excellent." It was delightful, feeling the warmth rushing through her throat as if she had swallowed fire, and the immediate surge of intoxication after consuming the liquor. After enjoying the intoxication for a moment, Adele opened her eyes again and poured another glass of alcohol into her empty glass. He said, "Do you intend to drink in a succession?" "Oh, that's right. You're someone who doesn't understand the pleasure of alcohol," she replied. Even though the Empress narrowed her eyes and gave a warning glance, the advisor didn't bat an eyelash. "Since I still have toast left, I'm just pouring the liquor." "What?" As Lionel attempted to respond, the Empress interrupted him with laughter. In an instant, the pale cheeks that had been affected by the strong liquor regained their color. Her long, curving golden eyes glistened with a fiery light, resembling a glass of alcohol. She said, "Well, even if I look like this, I am the Empress, after all. For the prosperity of Emont." With those words, the Empress swiftly downed the next glass as well. Without a break, she drank the potent liquor. With elegance, Lionel promptly rose from his seat and fetched water. Adele rinsed her mouth with the water he offered and then filled her glass with more alcohol. He muttered, "Your Majesty." She said, "You have to do it 3 times for good measure." He replied, "Then please wait a moment before drinking again. This liquor is not your ordinary strong drink." Adele pointed at a large, framed painting she had been observing with interest. "Lionel, that painting. Is it a portrait of the royal lineage?" Lionel glanced at the large, framed painting that Adele pointed to, then turned his gaze back to her. "Yes, that's correct," he replied. She continued, "When was this painting of yours? Is that cute little kid you? He seems full of mischief in the painting. In the painting, a smiling boy is sitting in front of the Duchess." "I think it was before I turned 10, he replied. He continued, "My father once said something similar. He told me I was a troublemaker. He was frustrated because I always created problems just big enough to be within my power to resolve." Empress giggles and spoke, "Lionel the troublemaker, huh? It would be great if I could see your old self. You must have been very adorable." He was embarrassed and then spoke, "I think I'm more relieved to have met you now instead of when I was younger, Your Majesty." She asks, "Why is that?" He continued, "Because there is no way a little child could become an aide. I probably wouldn't even qualify as a candidate." Empress again giggled like a normal girl, then spoke, "A little child as an aide. What a strange thought you have there. Ha! Even if you hadn't become an aide, I believe I would have kept you by my side and adored you." The moon casts its dim light on the night. Like the night itself, strands of black hair cascaded, disheveled, and scattered. A faint blush rose on her flushed face, giving him a strange vitality. Her ruby-red lips glistened with the touch of alcohol, and his golden irises, trapped within long, twisted eyelashes, seemed devoid of the coldness brought by intoxication. Was it the intoxication of the untouched alcohol that emanated from the strong scent of illicit liquor? Lionel quickly averted his gaze, feeling the heat spreading from his throat. "Lionel." At that moment, the Empress called his name once again, and Lionel couldn't help but raise his eyes. Adele blinked slowly, looking at him. She thought why his neck became red, and why he looked so handsome. Is it because of alcohol? She thought he seemed more impressive and handsome than she thought. She then opened her mouth and spoke, "If you have any questions you want to ask them now. Even if it's a question you think you can't dare ask the Empress, it's in the house." They asked as if those shimmering golden eyes were piercing into Lionel's thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth. "Your Majesty, as the Gotrov Tower Resistance Headquarters leader, may I ask why you willingly agreed to the marriage with Emont?" It was undoubtedly a rude question. However, Adele tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as if she had expected it. She said, "Oh, you're getting your money's worth, aren't you?" He said, "If you find it difficult to answer, you don't have to." "Please forgive me." Adele chuckled and lowered her head, and spoke, "Well, it doesn't matter. This isn't Gotrov, after all." Then she pointed at the painting with her finger. She continued, "In the Gotrov Palace, there's a painting of my family, just like this one. It couldn't look more harmonious." Adele looked at the painting and thought of Lucio, her younger brother. Lucio, has he received my letter by now? Unable to face each other, she resorted to a cowardly method to deliver it. She continued, "My father's illness suddenly worsened, and he passed away. In the midst of Gotrov's confusion, my mother suddenly showed me the proposal letter and told me to go to Emont. The tower resistance couldn't find a reason to refuse. And in truth, I couldn't refuse either. He asked, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "This is my apology." Lionel couldn't understand her words, but he couldn't bring himself to ask further. Sadness filled Adele's face, and Lionel's silent attitude pleased her. She then spoke, "Well, the alcohol is just 2 glasses worth. The tab ends here. Let's go back, Lionel." Lionel also stood up, following her lead. "Leave the bottles and glasses. I'll have someone take care of them tomorrow." "Thank you," she replied. In the late evening, this time it was Adele who took the lead. Since they had walked this path before, she confidently set the direction, and Lionel followed behind her. In the darkness, her hair, resembling the darkness itself, swayed slowly. Lionel once again realized something. The Empress's stature was smaller than he had imagined. Around that time, Karl Ulrich was sitting alone in his bedroom, drinking alcohol. He couldn't remember why he had taken out the alcohol or what he was trying to relieve by drinking it. His heart was always empty. Strange things would emerge from the gaping hole that never seemed to fill it. Mostly, they were remnants of the past. Whenever those things emerged, the deep and dark sea would always roil, and Karl had to exert all his strength just to breathe. Suddenly, that day came to mind. The day he held the hand of Duke Despun and ascended to the throne. He stood next to the Emperor's seat and whispered like this, "Now, you have become the most precious person in the world. I will bring the world to you. Enjoy it to your heart's content." At that time, Karl Ulrich was only 10 years old. That day, he had been vaguely fearful and cold, desperately hoping for the meal to end quickly. Another memory from his childhood came to mind. Why were the faint memories of his youth so vivid, driving him insane? And after wandering through that memory, Karl Ulrich returned to the present. He muttered, "Where did she go?" It was a voice that roared like a wild beast. Everyone turned their heads at the command to find out where the Empress had gone. It was impossible to know. The Empire's Empress had disappeared, and nobody knew her whereabouts. The courtiers trembled and stuttered in response to the Emperor's enraged demand. He informed the Emperor, since there was no budget allocated to the Empress' palace. Her Majesty does not have any escort knights nor private maids assisting her. Countess Hannah Kix said she does not know. And the Empress' palace maids were doing their own tasks around the time Her Majesty left the palace. "Damn it," he shouts. "Does this mean I cannot find the Empress' whereabouts, because I didn't allocate any budget to the Empress' palace?" However, the answer is quite simple. Where would she go? Where would she foreigner go to in Egmont besides her palace? He rises up from his seat and throws away his glass. He muttered, "It's obvious the Empress is at Duke Valgier's residence." Next day, Duke residence. Lionel could not sleep. He thought memories of last night were still vivid, as if it happened not long ago. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to fall asleep, because the sound of that person's lively laughter was ringing ever so clearly in my ears. The meal was set in the Duke's private drawing room. As Adele entered the room, his brother, Lionel, who had already arrived, stood up and greeted her politely. A delighted smile adorned her face as the delicious aroma of the food wafted to her nose. Duke asked, "Did you have a full night's rest, Your Majesty?" But the Empress smiled, and turned her head toward Lionel and asked the same question from him, "Did you sleep well too?" Lionel, "Thanks to you, I slept soundly." He replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." Duke was surprised, how both of them were behaving. He thought, "What is this? The atmosphere between them seems to have changed. Did something happen between them last night?" After a while, Theseus, having finished eating first, seized the opportune moment to speak with the Empress. Do you have any particular plans for today? Theseus inquired, taking a sip of water to cleanse his palate. Adele delicately swallowed her own sip of water, then nodded. Indeed, there is something I wish to accomplish. However, I require assistance. Tell me, Theseus urged, intrigued by her request. She continued, I apologize if it inconveniences you, but I would greatly appreciate it if you could assign me 1 or 2 knights who are both reliable and familiar with the local geography. Theseus interjected, his curiosity evident in his expression. May I inquire as to why? Adele shifted her attention to Theseus and answered with determination. Today, I intend to explore the capital city. More specifically, I wish to visit the slums that we discussed earlier. Lionel interrupted, his voice tinged with surprise. You want to go to the slums? Adele's eyes sparkled with a question. Why not? What good is it to merely skim the surface? I am not embarking on a leisurely sightseeing excursion. In that case, count me in, Lionel responded swiftly, while Theseus nodded in agreement. The notion that the Empress should avoid such dilapidated areas was dismissed without a second thought. Adele couldn't help but grin, appreciating her brother's open-mindedness. Thank you, she expressed with heartfelt gratitude. With swift efficiency, Adele and Lionel departed. Both of them concealed their identities, shrouding their faces in oversized hoods and masks. Adele couldn't help but inquire with a hint of concern, did I ask someone in a position of importance to engage in something inappropriate? Lionel responded lightly, reassuring her, fear not, the time has come for you to witness it firsthand. A soft chuckle brushed against Lionel's ears like a gentle breeze. The slums greeted them first with a pungent odor that pervaded the air. The stench clung to their nostrils, and before long, an expanse of squalor sprawled before their eyes. It resembled a colossal heap of filth. Pointing towards a small river that flowed between the slums and the nearby residential areas of the common folk, Lionel explained, that river is called Nayabara. Its name signifies cold, clear water, but now it's impossible to find any semblance of purity there. Soldiers guarded each bridge spanning the river, diligently inspecting those who crossed over from the slums. Adele peered down as she traversed the bridge, witnessing people washing their clothes and bodies in the murky, foul-smelling water. It appears that access to clean water is scarce, Adele commented. Very limited, Lionel confirmed. As for the bathroom facilities, they say that after performing their tasks within the household, waste is discarded outside, he replied matter-of-factly. What in the world is that burnt smell? She asked, her voice laced with disgust. It's likely the scent of burning corpses. With no space for the living to rest, there is also no place for the dead, Lionel replied. Adele halted abruptly, her eyes fixated on the immense slum that stretched beyond her line of sight. The sight gripped her throat, constricting it as if someone were choking her. Removing the mask that concealed her face, she uttered, Please, do not worry about me wearing the mask. Lionel's response was tinged with concern. It's for your own protection. Who knows who might recognize you here? In an angry tone she spoke, to these people, the Empress would be deemed worse than the scraps of bread they ate today. Adele fell into silence, the weight of the words weighing heavily upon her. Finally, in a murmured voice, as she resumed guiding her horse forward, she uttered, I have walked into hell. In that moment, their golden eyes met, burning with intensity. The Empress suddenly erupted with anger. Damn it! Are people still turning a blind eye even after witnessing this? What the hell have you all done to let our country fall into such a state? Are all the aristocrats in this country fools? What the hell are they doing? A living hell is unfolding right before our eyes, and if it's not me, all they have to do is block the road with soldiers like that. No hospitals, no schools, no proper water facilities. Even if you raise a devil, it's their doing. If they turn a blind eye to what is being created and how it's decaying in that hell, what are they going to do? Her rage echoed through the air. Lionel remained silent for a moment, taking off his mask and hood, and respectfully bowing his head. The Empress's words and anger felt justified, and Lionel was more than willing to lend his support. As he lowered his head, Adele let out a deep sigh and touched her forehead and spoke, "I'm sorry. I was angry at you without reason." "No, no," Lionel replied, his heart racing within his chest. He exhaled heavily, feeling the rush of his pulsating heartbeat. Raising his head once again to meet the Empress's golden eyes, Lionel realized that he had been awaiting her outburst. He spoke, "Whatever you desire, I will assist you." It was a pledge he had never made to anyone before. Meanwhile in Imperial Palace, Diane's beloved Emperor bestowed upon her the prestigious guest chamber within the Imperial Palace, a place she once frequented before the lavish halls of Ivory Palace became her sanctuary. However, today, as Diane returned to the Emperor's favored guest room, a wave of indignation coursed through her veins. This very place had once been a source of pure bliss and boundless happiness. On that first night, when she laid her head to rest in this room, she marveled at the colossal bed and the towering ceiling, their grandiosity beyond comprehension. The inability to acclimate to such opulence left her wide-eyed, sleep evading her throughout the night. Yet now, comparing it to the resplendence of Ivory Palace, this place seemed cramped and devoid of beauty. Diane had meticulously curated a treasure trove of rare artifacts and masterpieces procured from the depths of Ivory Palace. The night she transitioned from Ivory Palace to the guest room, slumber eluded her once more, just as it had on that initial night. Despite her arrival, the Emperor had not sought her presence. Diane rose from her seat, consumed by hesitation, until finally she stepped out into the corridor, draping herself in a sumptuous cardigan over a delicate slip. The hallway leading to the Emperor's innermost chambers teemed with vigilant guards and loyal attendants. Among them, the astute attendant who recognized her immediately approached, offering a deferential nod and said, "Lady Diane of House Poitiers." At his words she frowned, and spoke, "What did you just say?" The attendant replied, his countenance revealing a mixture of unease and inevitability. "I beg your pardon, but your current standing within the palace is that of a distinguished guest." In a voice thick with anguish, she inquired, "Is His Majesty within?" "Yes, he is," he replied. She continued, "Please convey my desire to meet with him." After a brief interval, the attendant who had ventured into the inner sanctum returned, executing a formal bow. "Please proceed inside." The Emperor sat silently on the sofa. She said, "Are you unable to sleep? You seem troubled, Your Majesty." He didn't respond. As his deep violet eyes grew darker, so did the depths of Diane's heart. The Emperor had discerned the reason behind his own unease. There was no doubt that his restless heart burned in the late hours of the night. And if it had been because of Diane, he would have sought her out. Yet, having lost the Ivory Palace and even her name, Diane Poitiers was no longer of concern to him. Then she spoke, "Her Majesty is probably at the Valgier residence right now." Our story ends here, my friends. Once again, Happy New Year. And do give us like, comment, and share, this will help us.